Our next topic is Lena Paul is our speaker, and she's account manager with GTA West for Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. And this request came from one of our members that they wanted on the agenda a topic on safety, and that's why we've invited Lena to speak. So Lena, if you want to unmute your phone and come on, I'll flip the slides for you, okay? Is Lena there? Lena, I know you were on there. No?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
I'll just restart. I've been talking to myself for the past 30 seconds or so. So thank you very much for inviting me this afternoon to speak to you. Yes, we are going to provide, or I'm going to provide basically some foundational knowledge around safety today, and there will be some overlap from our first presentation, but I'll try not to be too repetitive. We got off to a strong start there. So John, thank you for the introduction. Yes, I'm from Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. We are a health and safety association, and we service primarily manufacturing, service sector, and agricultural clients. And our mandate is to support businesses in staying healthy and safe every day. So that is our value, that's our mandate, that everyone go home, every worker healthy and safe every day. So some quick agenda items on our topic, and I am going to be very, very mindful of time because I do know you have a very, very full agenda today. So we will end promptly at 2:20. So we'll talk about the foundation of health and safety, so the internal responsibility system, and we got a bit of an overview on that just a few minutes ago. We'll talk a little bit about due diligence and what it really means internally to, to demonstrate due diligence in the workplace. And if we have time, because I know I've packed my agenda as well, but if we have time, I want to touch on creating and supporting a safety culture, because that's really important. So this particular presentation, although we are going to be really talking about the foundation, the focus will be on leadership, employer and supervisors, and we will, of course, touch on the worker as well, but hoping to keep it a little more high level for this afternoon. So, excuse me. I am aware that we have a few participants online who are not in Ontario. So I've just put together just a quick slide here just around health, safety, and the law in the various provinces that are represented today. So in British Columbia, we have the Workers' Compensation Act. In Ontario, where today's presentation will be focused, we also have the Occupational Health and Safety Act and related regulations. Quebec, we have an act respecting workplace health and safety and an act respecting industrial accidents and occupational diseases. And then in Nova Scotia, we also have the Health and Safety Act, the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So, like I said, for the purpose of today, for our rather short presentation, for that 30 minutes, we are going to focus in on Ontario. Do feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions. If you are out of province, and I'll ask John to share my contact information because we do work with organizations outside of the province as well. So in Ontario, the Occupational Health and Safety Act is the foundational piece of health and safety legislation in Ontario. What does that mean? Well, it sets out the roles, responsibilities, and the legal authority and general principles for the employer, supervisor, workers, essentially our workplace parties, as well as the Ministry of Labor Training and Skills Development inspectors. So just a quick note, if you weren't aware already, the Ministry of Labor is now the Ministry of Labor Training and Skills Development. That's MLTSD, from what used to be the MOL. So just a quick note on that. So the responsibilities must be carried out according to the law to ensure the health and safety of everyone in the workplace. So that's what we're going to be touching on today. And we won't get into any specific regulations, but I'm sure you are aware that there are several regulations associated with the Act, including the Industrial Establishments Regulation 851, there's Women's Regulation 860, designated substances, confined spaces. So there are quite a number of regulations in Ontario. So I'm going to ask you to, of course, quietly think to yourself, because you know, we are remote here. We would typically do this as a bit of a discussion piece if we were in the same room. But think about the Occupational Health and Safety Act, or our Green Book in Ontario, and where do you land? Do you land as an employer, supervisor, worker? Trick question. We are all workers, but some of us have additional duties and roles. So let's get into a bit of the nitty-gritty around the Internal Responsibility System, or the IRS, in Ontario. So we always go top-down when we talk about the Internal Responsibility System, or the IRS. So employers, what are employers required to do under the law in Ontario when it comes to health and safety? Well, employers are required to provide a safe work environment. Great. What does that actually mean? When we say, yes, you as the employer, you as the top person or persons in an organization are required to provide a safe work environment, what does that actually mean? It really means establishing a standard within your workplace and enforcing a standard. And this was talked a lot about in our previous presentation around really putting out what is required in order to stay healthy and safe in the workplace, and ensuring that you enforce it. And that means putting it down on paper. So, supervisors. What is required of supervisors? Well, supervisors, managers, lead hands may take on many different titles, but effectively, a manager or supervisor is an acting agent of the employer. What does that mean? Well, they're required to monitor that work and to ensure that the standards set out by the employer is being adhered to. So providing adequate job training, talking about the potential hazards in the workplace, and of course, monitoring. So providing feedback to workers, ensuring that they are working safely, and if they're not, asking the questions why. Perhaps that means providing additional training, perhaps that means changing up PPE, whatever that may mean. But it is the supervisor's job to monitor the adherence to the safety program. What is required of the workers? Well, the workers, including all of us, so regardless of whether we hold the title of employer or supervisor, we are also workers, and we are all required to comply, participate, and very important, bring concerns to the attention of the company. Concerns, what does that actually mean? It means hazards in the workplace. We all have a duty under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to report hazards in our workplace. So, if we do not know what the hazards are, how can we be expected to report them? That goes back up to the top. Establishing a standard, understanding the hazards, assessing the risk in our workplace, and ensuring we educate all of our workers on the hazards in the workplace. On the side of this slide, you'll notice that the Joint Health and Safety Committee, or the JHSC, provides a check on this system. So there's often a misunderstanding in many workplaces where they establish a committee, a Joint Health and Safety Committee, and they become safety in the workplace. It's their job. And so that is absolutely not the case. We all have a responsibility for safety in the workplace. It is the Joint Health and Safety Committee's responsibility to monitor the internal responsibility system, identify hazards, and make recommendations to the employer for positive changes in the workplace. Many times people think the Joint Health and Safety Committee is responsible for making those changes. That is incorrect. Okay, can we just move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we'll get into a little bit of a deeper dive into the Occupational Health and Safety Act. We won't go into too much detail, but I did want to outline the various sections of the Act when we talk about the internal responsibility system and our duties in the workplace. So of course, when we talk about the IRS, we always start at the top, which is Section 25, the general duties of the employer. Okay, so this focuses on the responsibility of the employer to ensure that equipment, materials, and protective devices are provided, maintained in good condition, and used properly. So when we say that, this is basically saying we need to provide the tools to do the job safely, and it is the employer's responsibility to do that. We talked earlier about setting a standard. That's bullet number 2. Safety measures and procedures are followed in the workplace, provided you have them. And again, that is the employer's responsibility. Next slide, please. Section 25, subsection 2. So we're still focused on the general duties of the employer. So right there, prepare the health and safety policy. Review it each year and develop and maintain a program to implement the policy. Now that is a very, very few words that actually says a lot there. So number 1, providing a health and safety policy. The health and safety policy, I'm sure everyone knows, is the one-pager signed by the most senior person in the organization and dated within the current year. It typically is posted on all of our health and safety bulletin boards and at the entrance of our organization. Great. What does that actually mean? A health and safety policy is merely a commitment. It is a commitment from your employer and your organization to provide a safe and healthy workplace. The program. So the program where we set the standard, we provide the training, we communicate, we monitor, we provide feedback to our employees and our workers. That is our program. And our program are all of the actions that we take in an organization or in our company to support the commitment, which is our health and safety policy. So one statement, but a lot of meaning there. It is also the employer's responsibility to appoint competent persons as supervisors. And if we have time, we will get into a bit of a discussion. When I say discussion, really just me talking about the difference between a qualified individual and a competent individual, and what does that really mean? So review from our first presentation today. It is the employer's responsibility to take every reasonable precaution to protect the workers. And there's always a debate on what is reasonable, and our first presenter today really touched on that as well. So I am a health and safety professional, and I live and breathe in the health and safety world. What is reasonable to me may not be reasonable to an employer or a business owner or a supervisor. We still need to focus on that reasonable precaution. And I cannot define reasonable for you. Unfortunately, it means different things to different individuals. The employer is also required to support the Joint Health and Safety Committee or the Health and Safety Representative. So again, it's the same thing as providing that safe work environment for your workers, to provide the JHSC or the Health and Safety Representative with the tools and the knowledge to be effective in their role. Okay, continued duties of the employer. So it is the responsibility of the employer, of course, employing only those who are legally eligible to work. That may seem like a no-brainer, especially to those of you in HR. However, there's a reason why it's written there. Providing information, instruction to the supervisors and the workers. So again, ensuring that your supervisors are competent. Those people who have the authority over a worker, ensuring that they are competent, they understand the hazards, and they communicate and train the workers effectively to ensure that everyone is able to do their job safely. As an employer, you may be required to provide information if there is a medical emergency for the purpose of diagnosis or treatment. Next slide, please. Okay, and last slide in discussing employer duties is this slide specifically, Section 26, subsection 1 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act in Ontario, discusses hazards specifically related to biological, chemical, or physical agents. So this can include, providing records, keeping and providing records for the handling and storage of your biological, chemical, or physical agents, possibly involving medical surveillance of workers. So we're looking a lot at, things like designated substances often require medical surveillance. And then, we won't get into too much detail on the human rights, but the other thing is, provided that the worker consents to medical surveillance, and that's a different story altogether, and a discussion for another time. Setting standards for limiting the exposure to biological, chemical, and physical agents as well, which may include things like hygiene testing and noise testing, things like that. Okay, so moving along to the duties of the supervisor. So this is Section 27 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. First bullet, we notice there's some overlap with the employer around taking every reasonable precaution to protect the worker. Did we do everything in our power as the supervisor, as the employer, to provide a safe work environment and to empower our employees to do their job safely, to report hazards in the workplace, to participate in safety in the workplace, taking every reasonable precaution? Supervisors are workers as well as our employers, so it's all of our responsibility to ensure that we use or wear equipment, protective devices, and clothing as required by the employer. Remember, the employer sets the standard. It's everyone's job to comply with the standard. That third bullet point really focuses in on the importance of appointing a competent supervisor, someone or some persons who really understand not only what are the actual hazards in the workplace, the ones that are right in front of us, but what could potentially happen in our workplace, and what is our control, what is our potential response to that, and being able to communicate that effectively to our workers, training and instructing the workers, and of course providing feedback. Supervisors are required to provide workers with written instructions on how to protect the workers. So that goes back to one of the earlier points that was made. You got to put it on paper. That's what a program really is. And taking every precaution reasonable, which is a review. So I didn't put in a slide on worker responsibility because I touched on it throughout the section, but again, just as a quick overview, we are all required to follow the standard that has been established by our employer, report hazards to the employer or our supervisors first, then our employer, and of course we are not to, under any circumstances, modify or make ineffective any one of our protected devices. We are supposed to never, ever, ever engage in any pranks or boisterous conduct in the workplace. Again, we may look at that and say, well, of course, but there's a reason why it's actually written in our legislation. And it is very much written that way, that we are not to provide or engage in any prank, contest, feat of strength, or any running or rough, boisterous conduct. It is very clearly written in our legislation. So I just thought I'd touch on that as well. Okay, so we're about halfway through the presentation, a little over halfway, so just less than 15 minutes left. So what I want to do is just a quick touch on due diligence. And really, what is due diligence? So we heard a lot right from the beginning when we started speaking today about taking every reasonable precaution to protect the workers. Workers do not have the duty to take every reasonable precaution, believe it or not. It is the worker's responsibility to comply. So comply with what? Well, comply with the standard that we've established as an organization. Our employer and our supervisors are required to set those, our employer is required to set the standard. Our supervisors, our managers are required to train and enforce that standard. So what are the costs? What are the indirect costs of not taking every precaution reasonable? And there's not enough time to go through it today, but I could pull out a number of cases for us to discuss on where every precaution was not taken and it's really damaged an organization. So, reputation to an organization. We've seen a number of companies in the news where they just have, one accident after the other, and every accident is preventable, and that really is damaging to your reputation, especially now when many customers and clients actually require you to maintain a minimum standard around safety. So you can really damage your reputation by not taking every precaution reasonable. That's one thing. That's to the organization as a whole. But really, what about your most important resource in your organization, which is your people? What does that do to your people when they don't feel like their employer really is engaged in keeping them safe and healthy at work? What does that do to the individual? It causes low morale. It causes low morale throughout the organization. And we know as individuals who support our resources within an organization, really how damaging that really is to our company. It causes stress. Stress often results in high absenteeism in the workplace, or presenteeism in the workplace, where people just kind of come in to show face, but really nothing is happening. Very low productivity due to stress. Or now we have chronic stress, where folks actually are claiming stress-related leave. And then there's both physical and emotional pain that can go along with not demonstrating due diligence. Okay, a quick touch on enforcement and offences. So the Ontario Ministry of Labour Training and Skills Development, the MLTSD as they're now known, their inspectors enforce the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the regulations. Okay, so that is their job. Health and safety associations are focused on prevention, MLTSD enforcement. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of an inspector's role? Well, they can inspect workplaces. So as I'm sure you all know, the inspector can come into a workplace. They typically ask, or they always ask to see the worker member of the Joint Health and Safety Committee if one is established, and they can inspect the workplace for contraventions of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations. They can issue orders based on those contraventions. They can even order an employer to have an impartial person come in and investigate, and that could be that is at the employer's expense, specifically around complaints and incidences around workplace harassment. We talked about this in the first presentation as well around work refusals. So stage 2 work refusal requires the Ministry of Labor's Training and Skills Development Health and Safety Inspector to come in and investigate incidents if they do reach a stage 2. Okay. And they can also make recommendations for prosecutions in the cases typically of critical injuries or fatalities. Okay, so there are fines and penalties that that are that have been handed out to organizations for contraventions of the Act around lack of demonstrating due diligence. So that can be up to $100,000 fine per charge, or up to 12 months in prison with a 25% victim surcharge. That is per offense, and that is for the individual. Corporations can be fined up to $1.5 million per charge with a victim surcharge as well per offense. And just a quick note, I'm sure this is reviewed for many of you, but the Criminal Code, Section 217.1, this is actually written into our criminal code as well, and it applies to everyone who undertakes or has the authority to direct how another person works or performs a task. So it is written in our criminal code. So when a workplace fatality occurs or a critical injury occurs at a workplace, and 911 is engaged, an ambulance is engaged, typically a police officer will turn up as well as the Ministry of Labor Training and Skills Development inspector. The police officer is looking for contraventions of the criminal code. The inspector is looking for contraventions of the Health and Safety Act, the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Okay, so demonstrating due diligence. So when we say, you know, we need to act, or we need to take every precaution reasonable to protect the worker, what does that really mean? It means writing it down in many cases. So the things that we are doing to demonstrate due diligence, to support our commitment, that commitment being what's written in our health and safety policy, the program being all the actions that we're taking, that is demonstrating due diligence. So we need to document what we do in safety when it comes to the workplace. So something that we typically talk about in our supervisor courses is carrying a journal, which many of us do in our work, but this journal is very specific to what actions you're taking on a day-to-day basis, and keeping a log, which is very, very important. Demonstrating that you are doing your job. Are you providing feedback when it comes to safety? Are you providing the training? What are you providing in that training? When was that training taken? Was there some sort of feedback in the form of an exam or test or observation, or both, which in my opinion is better. I often don't necessarily agree with a written test 5 minutes after the training course takes place. More important to observe how that person applies the training in the workplace. Okay, so with the last 5 minutes, I just want to touch quickly on creating and supporting a culture of safety in the workplace. Supervision, versus leadership in the workplace. And this is something that we always want to keep in the back of our minds, especially when it comes, well, I mean, I think in all aspects of our jobs when we're talking about supervision versus leadership, and both are required. But when we talk supervision, we're really looking at the individual in the task. What is the day-to-day expectation that we need to work on? How do we evaluate that performance? And how do we essentially get the best out of our team members? Leadership takes a step back and really focuses on the big picture. What is our overall purpose in this organization? What sort of culture do we want to cultivate in this organization? How do we want to keep our employees and our team members engaged and motivated at work? How do we keep our morale high? So earlier on, when we started the discussion around appointing or hiring competent supervision in the workplace, what does it really mean to be competent? What is the difference between competent and qualified? So we typically have a discussion around this piece, but it's difficult to do that in this format. So I'm just going to answer those questions for you right now. So a competent person has demonstrated that they have the knowledge and skills to do the job. They understand the job. They understand, more importantly, the hazards how to do that job safely. A qualified person may have a license, degree, or certificate, some kind of professional standing in order to do a set of tasks. So they've met the minimum standard, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are competent yet. That doesn't necessarily mean they understand the intricacies of doing the job safely. So a really common example of this is new drivers. Technically, a new driver is qualified to be on the road to operate a vehicle on the road. Are they competent? Do they have the experience? Do they really understand the inherent dangers of, say, driving down Queen Street in rush hour traffic and everything that they have to look out for? Probably not, because they don't have this, they haven't developed the skill yet. So competent versus qualified. I hope that was clear. So I'm going to wrap up now. You can just change the slide. Just wanted to reiterate our value here at Workplace Safety and Prevention Services, that every day in the work that we do, we are always thinking of every worker going home healthy and safe every day. And that is what we want, that is the message that we want to get across to anyone who's out there, especially in these times, and these are unprecedented times. So I do appreciate your time and attention today. I'll ask John to just, thank you very much. So there it is, that's our website and our phone number. Please feel free to contact us. If you have any questions or concerns, we do have a number of resources on our website too around managing this pandemic situation. So I would encourage you to take a look there. John, did you want to talk to our upcoming webinar?
Oh, yeah, you can go ahead and do that.
Okay. So I'll be hosting a series of webinars, I'd say probably about once a quarter, for about an hour or so on specific health and safety topics. So it was sort of strategic today to start off with a foundation piece, talking about the internal responsibility system today, before we get into some more specific health and safety topics. So the first webinar will be on June 11th at 1 p.m. And we're going to be talking about heat stress coming into the summer months. And it'll be about an hour, like I said, and hopefully we'll have some room for a bit of discussion and questions at that time as well, but we'll see how that goes. So I'm looking forward to that, and thank you very much again for inviting me today.
Thank you, Lena, and we'll be promoting the webinars that we've talked about to the EFC members. So